Welcome to my channel, or welcome back. So my name's Katie. If you're new, thanks for stopping by. So today is going to be my help me pick my pan that palette video. I've been wanting to do one of these for a while. Last year I had a very clear vision of which palettes I wanted to work on, so I just sort of picked those and went with them. But this year I have a couple of options and I'm honestly not sure, so I figured I would film this video and have you guys weigh in if you want to on what you think I should pick and why, because I'm honestly torn. I have a couple of different directions that I could go in. And so the way I'm going to be doing this is that I'm going to flip over to overhead style. I'm going to go through and talk about my criteria and eliminate palettes, and then once I have my short list of palettes, we're going to come back to my face and I'm going to go over the pros and cons of each palette and sort of talk about which ones I'm leaning more towards and why. And then I'm going to have you guys, if you so desire, weigh in on what you think I should pick, because I honestly have a couple that are sort of tied for like my top two, but I'm honestly not sure. I kind of go back and forth on which one I should pick depending on the day of the week, so I figured that's why I'm enlisting you guys to help me pick. I will have the final say, but I'm definitely taking feedback into consideration because, like I said, I'm really not sure. So having said that, let's go over to my floor. I'm going to pull out my palettes and we'll get to picking. So these are all of my potential contenders for a possible pan that palette. I have 4 different criteria that I'm going to be working on for right now. So I picked 4 different criteria that I'm going to be using to eliminate palettes to get to my short list, which I think is going to be like 3 or 4 different palettes. So my first criteria is that I don't want any monochromatic palettes. You guys know, if you've been around, that I love a good monochromatic eye, but also my first pan that palette was a monochromatic green palette and I got very tired of wearing greens. I am the kind of person who likes variety, so that did not offer enough variety to keep me going, and I know that I would get bored really quickly if I picked a monochromatic palette, so that is going to eliminate Lilac You a Lot, She's in Parties, Leela is also a little bit bigger than I would want to go. These are deep pans and this is also fairly new to me. And for the sake of this, I know the child isn't fully monochromatic, but most things are green, so I'm also going to eliminate that. And these are my remaining ones that I'm considering to be non-monochromatic. So the next criteria is that I want a mix of warm tones and cool tones. I gravitate towards different colors different times of the year, so I know for me, if I were to pick something that is entirely warm toned, I would really struggle with that in late fall through early spring, and then vice versa. If I were to pick cool tones, I would struggle in the summer most likely. So I want something that has a variety of both so that I don't get bored. So that means that Sunrise is going to go. As much as I love this one, a little bit too warm toned, I would struggle in like January, February. Secondly, Stone Cold Fox. I like this palette, but this is also way bigger than I would want to go for a pan that palette because it is a 30 pan, so that is also too cool toned. Then Mary Jane. I feel like this could be a contender in a few years. This one is not quite as overtly cool toned as Stone Cold Fox, but it is definitely leaning more cool. Although I will say that these olives you can like warm up a little bit depending on what you pair with the lid, but we're also going to eliminate this one for right now. Gemini, this one is not fully warm toned. I mean, I would say Luna, Cupcake, and maybe Leo are a little bit cool toned, but for the most part, this is very much like a summer and fall palette for me. Gemini is mostly warm toned. There are some cooler shades like Ladylike and Himelas, as well as like these greens, but again, this one just doesn't quite have the variety that I would want. And so that leaves me to my final 5. So the next 2 that I'm going to be eliminating are ones that are a little bit newer to my collection. I do want to focus on things that are a little bit older and that have just been around for longer. So 27, as much as I think this would be, again, a great contender possibly in a few years because it does have a mix of warm tones and cool tones, this one is quite new. I got this, I think, in May or June, so this one is going to go. And then Modern Renaissance hasn't been used enough for me to really want to consider it. This one is a little bit older. I got this one towards the end of 2021. I know people have panned this one in the past, but for me, this is just a little bit too new to want to work on. These are my final 3. Technically, Let That Shit Go is a little bit newer, but it is smaller than some of the melt palettes that I eliminated. I am considering keeping this one in for a few reasons that I will go over. So first of all, my Norvina. I think this is also a pretty obvious choice. I have very clearly loved this one. It's got a mix of warm tones and cool tones. I've also finished 2 shades, which is helpful, and this just has the variety that I think would keep me from getting bored throughout the year. Then we also have Carly Bible. Same idea. We've got obviously the cool tones on the top. These are very winter to me, and then these are more like spring, summer, fall, so I definitely have some variety here. Again, I finished 1 shade and I have panned about half this palette. And Let That Shit Go. This is a little bit newer than some of the other palettes that I did eliminate, but this is a 9 pan, and this one again has a mix of warm tones and cool tones. These obviously are quite neutral and would work, and Sage Stick as well would work for like every day. And then we've got some colors that I think I could definitely make work during winter as well. So again, we've got some variety. So these are my short list, and I'm gonna pop you back to my face and then we're going to talk a little bit more about the pros and cons of each palette. Okay, so I have my short list here. I've got these 3. 2 ABH and 1 BH, and I thought I would go through them, talk about the pros and cons. If you see me looking down, it's because I do have a list of notes, because of course I do. I'm gonna start off with the BH Let That Shit Go palette. I've got a couple of pros and a couple of cons for this one. This is kind of like my wild card. I don't think I've ever seen anybody hit pan on these or try to fully pan one, so it obviously looks like this. It's a really fun mix of green and neutrals, which is why why I sort of left it in, because I would not consider this to be an entirely monochromatic palette, whereas the Child, I feel like everything is a little bit green. Even the shades that are more like golds or silvers still have like a greenish undertone to them. This isn't officially a pro or a con, but I do know that some people don't like cursing, so I generally try not to on this channel, but I know the title of this could be a turnoff for some people. But starting off with the pros of this one, I think the biggest one is that I really like the color story. I think it's a really fun mix of neutrals and a couple of pops of color. I feel like there are plenty of things you can do with this palette. I really enjoy the looks that I get with it, and I think it would work for all seasons. Like, I feel like these guys could be very wintry because they're a little bit more icy. Blissed Out is a really nice neutral brown that you can manipulate to pull more cool or warm. I love these greens. They're definitely not everyday kind of colors for me, but they're always really fun to reach for. You've got some warm colors that could be more fall appropriate, so I feel like you've got, even though it's only a 9 pan, plenty of scope, and I feel like I wouldn't get bored with this one, so that is definitely a pro. The other pro is that this is a 9 pan palette, so I feel like finishing up most of the shades would be quite doable because it's not like I'm trying to work through 14 or 15 shades, so I think that is definitely a pro for this one as well. Smaller and a little bit more manageable. Now for my cons, the main con for this one I think is that I'm really looking to hopefully pan a palette to completion or as close to completion as possible compared to just trying to hit pan on every single shade. So for this one I think the bright greens would be really difficult for me to finish. I wouldn't mind trying to finish, like, say all of these shades right here and potentially Sage Stick and just leave these guys and keep the palette for those. This would not be the type of palette that I could pan to completion, so that would be the biggest con for this for sure, is that I highly doubt that I would be able to completely finish these 3 shades. I know that if I continue to stay in my current work environment or even head back to grad school before the end of the year, I think that especially like Shake It Off would be really difficult for me to finish, so I don't think I'd be able to completely pan this palette, which is pretty much the biggest con for this. Also, like I said earlier, the name, I know some people are sensitive to that, and I feel like going, this is my Let That Shit Go palette might be a little much for some people. I know some people feel pretty strongly about that kind of thing, so those are sort of the pros and cons for that palette. So next up I have my ABH Carly Bible palette, which I really love this palette. I think this one is very underrated as far as ABH palettes go. So it does look like this. As you guys can see, I have finished the shade Bear, which was like a lid setting shade. It was like a matte cream, but I still have 13 shades remaining on this one. Pros of this one are that I really do love the color story. It's one of those ones that works for all times of the year. I really gravitate towards these cool tones in the winter. These are great for the spring, summer, and fall. So I know that this is a palette that I could be inspired for and am frequently inspired to reach for all times of years. Another pro, and I think the reason that a lot of people choose to try to pan to completion ABH palettes, is that they don't have a ton of product in the pans. I think these are 3/4 of a gram or like 0.8, so definitely less than a gram, and they're also fairly loosely pressed and kick up a lot, so they're fairly easy to finish. I did finish up Bear within a couple of months just using it to set my crease area before I went in with my mattes, so I think these are very, I don't want to say easy to finish, but a little bit more reasonable to finish rather than trying to finish a palette that has over a gram in each pan. My last pro for this one is that, as you guys can tell, I have made a lot of progress on it already. I have completely finished one shade, as I said earlier, and then I panned half of it, so I have a good amount of progress to start off with that I feel like finishing most of these would be definitely not outside the realm of possibility. I'm not going to say it would be easy, but it would definitely be doable, I think, over the course of the year, and some of these shades can be multitasked. Bali and Moo are a little bit deep for me to use as face highlights for most of the year, but in the summer, if I'm a little bit more tan, they can work. And then I feel like Stev and Cindy, if I were light-handed or mixed them with something, could be multitasked as blushes. So I definitely feel like there are options, and this would be, if not necessarily easy, totally doable to finish most of the shades, which brings me to my con for this palette, which is that I think some of these darker shades, specifically these ones right here, these last 3 right here, would be a little bit more difficult for me to finish. I think I would sort of struggle with OA. Boy, I think might be a little bit more difficult, and Jode I'm kind of not entirely sure about. I do like it, but it is definitely deeper and maybe not the most harmonious deep color on my skin tone. I think those might be a little bit more of a challenge for me to finish, but I'm up for a challenge, so that's pretty much the only con that I can think of for this palette, and it is definitely one that I enjoy using all times of the year, and I think it's something that I would have a lot of fun trying to pan to completion. So that brings me to my last palette as part of my shortlist, which is the original Norvina palette. I love this thing. First pro for this one is that, same as Carly Bible, I love the color story in this. It's such a gorgeous blend of like pinks and purples, which we know that I love. Another pro for this one is that I have been, not that you can tell anymore, but I have been experimenting with dyeing my hair pink using semi-permanent dye. I started doing that in July, and the only reason I haven't refreshed is because I can't find the dye that I used in my local Shoppers Drug Mart. As soon as it comes back, I will be refreshing, and it's something that I would like to do on and off as like finances and stuff allow it to happen over the next little while until I get bored of it at least. And I know from experience that the last time I had my hair pink, this was my go-to because everything in this pulls a little bit pink or purple, even the shades that don't look as aggressively pink. For example, if we swatch Volatile, which is like this sort of charcoal shade right here, on the eye, this one definitely looks a little bit more rosy, and then same, this is Eccentric, which is like this mustard shade right here. So I really like the slight pink undertones. I think they're very flattering on my skin tone, and it just is sort of like a neutral with a twist kind of palette. So I think that there's a lot of different things that I can do with this, and I think it would be a lot of fun for me to use. I love the formula, I love the color story, and I've also heard that some people say that the ABH formula does start to degrade after the 2 to 3 year mark, and I'm definitely getting there with this one. So I think that is definitely a pro for using this one up and working it out of my collection. My last pro is that this has shades that I think that I could use all times of the year. I tend to be very seasonally inspired with my makeup. It's fall, I went like full monochromatic red because I was just feeling it today, and I think that this has definitely the scope to be used all year round. I think shades like Celestial Soul and Volatile are very much winter shades for me. Wild Child, Rose Gold, Incense, and Love are very like spring to me, and then Dazzling and Incense, Passion, Summer are very summer fall shades for me. So I think there's definitely scope for me to use this all year round, which brings me to my cons. First con is that I think I might struggle with some of these darker shades. I think Passion would be more difficult to finish up, as well as Drama, because it is very dark. I think some types of darker shades can actually be quite flattering, but I will say that Drama is, some of those dark purples can be a little bit stark on me no matter what I do. So I think I might struggle with like those two specifically, and the goal here really is to completely pan a palette if I can. My other con for this palette is also just that everything really does have that pink or purple undertone. Oh, I also think that I would really struggle with Soul. This is a color that I really wanted to love, but it's just not like the greatest on my skin tone, so I think I might have a really tough time finishing this one off. That I think would honestly be more of an obstacle than these two, because we do know that I love a smoky eye, and there are definitely ways to soften up Drama, like layering it over some of these. It doesn't come off as dark. Soul I think would be a struggle to finish. So that's my pros and cons list. In terms of getting deeper into my thoughts about which one of these I'm leaning more towards, I think Let That Shit Go would be fun, but it is a newer palette, and the fact that I might not be able to finish the greens throws me off a little bit. So for me, these two are the real contenders, and I go back and forth on them depending on the day. Initially, I was leaning more towards Norvina because it is older in my collection. It's a formula and color story that I know I love, but then some days I feel like going more for the Carly Bible because it definitely has a little bit more scope. There is a little bit more of an array of undertones, and it's a palette that I know I don't get bored of, whereas I kind of wonder if that might happen with the Norvina. But also there's the practical aspect of, yes, this one is a little bit older, and because I've already finished 2 shades, I think it would be fairly, if not necessarily easy, doable to finish up. I also think this one would go a little bit faster because I do have more usage on this, so I'm kind of going back and forth between the two of them, the more like practical aspect. And don't get me wrong, when I say practical, I really do love this palette. It is so much fun, and I think it is such an underrated gem of a palette. Honestly, they both are, for different reasons. So yeah, I kind of go back and forth on the two of them depending on the day, which is why I would love you guys to weigh in and let me know what you guys think. Which one do you think I should go for? Do you think Let That Shit Go would be fun? I am definitely curious about that too. So that is pretty much everything that I have for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed watching. If you do have feelings either way, feel free to let me know down below what you think I should pick and why. I'll also have my Pan That Palette playlist for this year and last year linked down below in case you want to binge watch them. This year was definitely much more successful than the year before, but you got to start somewhere, right? Or if there was a palette that I eliminated that you think I should consider, also feel free to let me know that down below. I would also be curious to know if you have done this project or are currently doing it, what your criteria are for selecting a palette, what you're looking for. And as always, if you haven't already subscribed and you want to see more of my face, I upload when I can. Feel free to give the video a like if you enjoyed it, and hopefully I'll catch you in the next one. Bye!